The day they threw her in free with 2 horses was the day the wind changed over Red Mesa. Folks still talk about that afternoon as if the dust itself remembers it. The sun hung high and mean, pressing down on the wooden roofs and wagon wheels, turning the whole auction yard into a pot about to boil. Men gathered with hats pulled low, boots planted firm in the dirt, waiting to bargain over cattle, tack, and whatever else a hard season had shaken loose. Nobody expected a story to begin there. They thought it was just another sale. The sign nailed crooked above the platform read auction, its letters faded from years of weather. Beneath it stood a tired auctioneer with a voice like dry gravel, calling out prices for 2 strong horses tied to a post. One was a tall black stallion with eyes sharp as flint. The other, a brown mare with a white blaze, kept shifting her weight like she knew something was wrong. They were good horses. Everyone could see that. Horses like that meant travel, work, maybe a fresh start. But beside those horses stood something else. She was young, though the dust and dried sweat on her skin made her look older. Her wrists were bound loosely with rope, not tight enough to hurt, but tight enough to show she was not free. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders in tangled strands. She wore a torn buckskin top and a skirt stiff with dirt from the trail. She did not cry, she did not beg. She just stood there, chin lifted, eyes steady, as if she refused to bend even in front of a crowd that had already judged her worth. Some of the men laughed. 2 horses and the girl comes free, the auctioneer shouted, trying to make light of it. No extra charge. Just part of the deal. A few hats tipped back as men squinted at her, whispering to each other. She was native, that much was clear from her features and the beaded cord tied around her neck. In those days, that alone was enough for some to look away and for others to stare too long. To many in that yard she was just a burden that came with the livestock, an afterthought. But not to him. He stood near the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat worn thin at the elbows from years in the saddle. A revolver rested low on his hip, not for show but for work. He had come to the auction for one reason only. He needed a strong team to haul timber from the North Ridge to his ranch. The last storm had broken his fences clean in half. Without horses, he would lose more than cattle. He would lose everything he had built with his own hands. He did not come looking for trouble. Trouble had a way of finding him anyway. When he first saw the black stallion, he knew the animal was worth more than the opening bid. The stallion held his head high despite the noise, muscles tense but controlled. A thinking horse, the kind that could outrun a dust storm and still find its way home in the dark. Then his gaze shifted. The young woman stood between the horses, her wrists tied but her back straight. For a second their eyes met across the yard. It was not a pleading look, it was not soft. It was fierce and quiet at the same time, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. He felt something tighten in his chest. The auctioneer kept talking, turning the whole thing into a joke. You buy the horses, you take her too. She can cook, clean, whatever you need. Or you can drop her at the edge of town. No fuss, some men chuckled again. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The cowboy's jaw set hard. He had fought in skirmishes along the frontier when he was younger. He had seen what happened when fear and pride mixed with rifles. He had lost friends on both sides of the line. He knew better than most that the land held more than one story. And he knew that no human being should be spoken of like a broken saddle. Still, he said nothing at first. He needed those horses. Winter would come sooner than folks thought. His ranch was already stretched thin. If he walked away empty-handed, he might not recover. He thought of the small cabin he had built by the creek. He thought of the fields he had cleared one stubborn stump at a time. He thought of the debt still hanging over him from last year's drought. The bidding started low. Hands rose, prices climbed. A rancher from downriver made a strong offer. Another man with a thick mustache tried to outbid him, more interested in the stallion than the mare. No one mentioned the woman except to laugh again about her being free. She did not flinch. When the price reached the edge of what he could afford, the cowboy hesitated. He counted the bills folded in his coat pocket in his mind. If he went any higher, he would have nothing left for feed or repairs. He would be betting his whole future on a pair of horses and a stranger tied with rope. The rancher downriver shouted a higher bid. The auctioneer looked pleased. "Do I hear more?" The cowboy's voice cut through the noise before he had time to think it over. "I'll take them." Heads turned. The rancher frowned and spat into the dirt. The auctioneer grinned wide. "Sold!" Just like that, it was done. A few men slapped him on the back as if he had won a prize. "Lucky you," one of them said. "Got yourself a bonus." He did not answer. When the crowd began to thin, he stepped forward to claim what he had paid for. He untied the horses first, running a calm hand down the stallion's neck. The animal snorted but did not pull away. The mare leaned into his touch like she had been waiting for someone steady, then he faced her. Up close, he saw that the dirt on her face could not hide the strength in her eyes. There was a small cut on her cheek, already healing. She held herself like someone used to wide-open land, not wooden fences and narrow yards. He cleared his throat. "I'm taking the ropes off," she nodded once. He untied her wrists slowly, careful not to brush against her more than needed. The rope fell to the ground between them. For a moment, neither moved. "You're not property," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You don't owe me anything." She studied him as if weighing the truth of his words. "Then why did you buy?" she asked, her voice steady but tired. He did not have a simple answer. "I needed the horses," he said at last. "And I wasn't leaving you here." A flicker of something passed over her face. Not gratitude, not yet, something deeper. Something guarded. "I can walk," she said. "I figured you could." They left the auction yard together, 2 horses between them. The sun dropping lower over Red Mesa. People watched from porches and windows, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. The cowboy could feel their stares like pebbles thrown at his back. He did not know her story. He did not know where she came from or what had led her to that platform. He only knew that something about the way she stood in that yard told him she was no burden. She was a storm waiting for the right wind. As they reached the edge of town, she stopped walking. "There are men who will follow," she said without looking at him. He glanced back. The road behind them seemed empty, but he knew better than to trust appearances. "From the auction?" "From before." The way she said it made the air feel heavier. He tightened his grip on the reins. "You bring trouble with you?" Her eyes met his again. "I bring truth," she answered. "And some men fear that more than bullets." He almost laughed, but something in her voice kept him from it. They continued on toward the open land beyond Red Mesa. The sky burned orange and red, stretching wide as a promise and just as uncertain. The horses moved steady under their guidance, hooves beating a quiet rhythm against the dirt. He had thought buying 2 horses would save his ranch. He had thought that was the biggest risk he would take that day. He was wrong. Because as the last light faded and the first shadow of night touched the trail, he heard it, hoofbeats behind them, not one rider. More than one. He slowed, listening. She did not look surprised. "You see," she said softly, "they never meant to give me away." The cowboy's hand drifted to the revolver at his side. The stallion tossed his head, sensing the tension. The mare pressed closer. Ahead lay his ranch, his fences, his fragile future. Behind them rode men who did not like losing what they believed belonged to them. And somewhere between those 2 directions stood a young native woman who had just become part of his life, whether he was ready or not. The wind rose across the plain, carrying dust and the sound of approaching riders. He took a slow breath and turned in his saddle to face whatever was coming. He still did not know that the choice he made at that auction would be the only reason he would keep everything he had built. But he was about to find out. The riders came fast, their shapes cutting across the last of the sunset like dark birds hunting low. Dust rose behind them in long, twisting trails. The cowboy did not need a clear view to know they were not out for a friendly talk. He shifted in the saddle and guided the 2 horses off the main trail toward a narrow stretch of dry creek bed. The ground there dipped low and offered some cover from open sight. He had learned the land the hard way, through years of storms and long cattle drives. Every bend and ridge held a lesson. Beside him, the young woman walked with calm steps, not rushing, not stumbling. She did not ask what he planned to do. She simply followed the change in direction as if she had already measured the land with her own eyes. "Who are they?" he asked under his breath. Men who trade in what is not theirs, she said. That tells me nothing. It tells you enough. The hoofbeats grew louder. The black stallion snorted and pulled at the reins, wanting to run. The cowboy stroked his neck, steadying him. Running now would only make them prey on open ground. He needed time. He needed to see how many riders followed and how close they were willing to get to town. They reached the creek bed and moved along its shadowed edge. The walls of dirt rose just high enough to hide them from a quick glance. The cowboy dismounted and tied the horses behind a bend where the bank curved sharp. "Stay low," he said. She crouched without question. He climbed the slope carefully and peeked over the rim. The riders had slowed near the outskirts of Red Mesa. There were 4 of them. He recognized one by his wide hat and thick shoulders, the rancher who had tried to outbid him at the auction. The rancher scanned the trail ahead, jaw tight. One of the other men pointed toward the open plain, as if guessing which way they had gone. "They won't search long," the young woman said quietly behind him. "Not tonight." He slid back down beside her. "You sound sure. They believe you will ride straight home. They think you do not know this land well." He almost smiled at that. "They would be wrong." She studied him in the fading light. "Why do you live out here alone?" "Because I prefer it," he said. Then, after a pause, "because there was nothing left for me back east." She did not press him. Instead, she listened to the riders above as they argued in rough voices. After a while, the sound of hoofbeats drifted away toward the main trail leading north. The cowboy waited longer than he needed to. Patience had kept him alive before. When the night finally settled heavy and quiet, he stood and brushed dirt from his coat. "We move now," he said. They led the horses through the creek bed until it met a narrow pass that opened toward the ridge above his ranch. The moon rose pale and thin, just enough to show the path. As they walked, he found himself wanting answers he had not dared to ask before. "They said you came with the horses," he said. "Like you were part of some deal. How does that happen?" She kept her eyes on the path. "My people camped near the river through winter. We traded hides for flour and tools. Some men from town did not like that we kept to ourselves. They said the land was no longer ours to use. That river feeds half the valley," he said. "It fed us long before fences were built." He had no answer for that. "There was a dispute," she continued. Voices raised, threats made. "One night our horses were taken. Without horses, we could not move camp before the soldiers came. You think those riders were behind it. I know they were." Her voice did not shake. It was steady as stone. "They took me when I tried to follow the tracks," she said. "They said they would return me if my people left quietly. Instead, they tied my wrists and led me into town." The cowboy felt a slow burn in his chest. And no one stopped them. Some looked away. Some believed their words. It is easy to believe a lie when it keeps your hands clean. They reached the ridge overlooking his ranch. In the moonlight, the small cabin stood near the creek, its roof patched from last winter's storm. The corral leaned slightly to one side where the fence posts had cracked. It was not much, but it was his. "This is it," he said. She looked at the cabin for a long moment. "You built it, every board." He led the horses into the corral and secured the gate with fresh rope. The stallion paced once, then settled. The mare lowered her head to drink from the trough. He lit a lantern inside the cabin. The room was simple. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the wall, a small stove in the corner. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep near the door," she replied. "You don't have to. I prefer it." He did not argue. As he placed more wood in the stove, he studied her in the lamplight. Without the harsh sun, he could see faint bruises on her arms where rope had rubbed. She moved carefully but not weakly. "What do they want from you now?" he asked. "They want silence." "About what?" She hesitated for the first time. "About what they are doing beyond the North Ridge." His grip tightened on the poker in his hand. "That is my land." She met his gaze. "Not all of it." He stepped closer. "Speak plain." She rose and walked to the small window facing the dark hills. "There is silver in those hills," she said. "Not much on the surface. Enough beneath to draw greedy men." He had heard rumors. Prospectors passing through town whispering about rock that shone under certain light. He had dismissed it as talk meant to stir up investors. They have been digging at night, she said, quietly, without claim, without permission. And you saw this. My people hunt in those hills. We see more than they think. He felt the weight of her words settle over him. If men were mining on his land without claim, it could ruin everything. Water poisoned, pastures torn up, soldiers called in to settle disputes. They would rather sell horses and people than admit what they are stealing, she added. He ran a hand through his hair. If that is true, why not tell the sheriff? She looked at him with something like pity. The sheriff owes them money. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the stove. He had worked years to keep his ranch afloat. If silver had been found there, it could bring fortune, or it could bring ruin faster than any drought. Mining camps drew gamblers, drifters, and trouble like flies to a carcass. You said they fear truth, he said slowly. What truth exactly? That the land remembers who walks it, she said. And that some men will not stand by while it is carved apart? He studied her face. You expect me to fight them? I expect you to choose? He almost laughed again, but the sound would not come. Outside, the wind shifted direction. It carried a faint echo of distant hooves once more. He stiffened. You think they followed? He asked. They will test you, she said. To see how much you are willing to risk. He stepped to the door and opened it just a crack. The night lay thick and still. No riders in sight. But the stallion in the corral lifted his head, ears pricked toward the north. The cowboy closed the door softly. I did not ask for this, he muttered. Neither did I, she replied. He leaned against the wall, thinking of the years he had spent carving this place from wild ground. He had buried a partner out here after a fever took him. He had weathered blizzards that nearly froze his cattle solid. He had outlasted drought and debt collectors. He thought he understood hardship. This was different. You saved those horses before, he said suddenly. At the auction, they trusted you. She gave a small nod. Animals know who means harm, do they? Yes. He thought of the way the stallion had calmed when she stepped near him on the platform. He had not noticed it then, but now he remembered. You said they never meant to give you away, he said. What did they plan? To move me farther west, she answered. Somewhere no one would ask questions. And now? Now they know I am here. He looked around his small cabin, at the walls that barely kept out winter wind. He realized that by buying 2 horses, he had stepped into something much larger than a simple rancher's problem. Why tell me about the silver? He asked. Because you are already part of it. The words hung between them. A sudden crack echoed from the direction of the corral, wood snapping. He grabbed his lantern and pushed the door open wide. The stallion reared against the fence, eyes wide. The Murray circled nervously. One of the corner posts had been split clean down the middle. The cowboy scanned the darkness beyond the fence line. For a second he thought he saw movement along the ridge, a shadow slipping behind rock. He did not fire. There was nothing clear to shoot at. She stepped beside him, calm but alert. They are close, she said. He felt anger rise in him now, steady and hot. This was his land, his fence, his hard work. They think they can scare me off, he said. They hope you will send me away, she replied. He looked at her, really looked at her, and understood something he had been slow to see. She was not just a woman caught in a cruel trade. She was a witness, a key to something powerful and dangerous. The wind carried another distant sound, not hoofbeats this time, but the faint ring of metal striking stone from far off in the hills. He turned toward the north ridge, where the darkness seemed thicker than the rest of the night. Somewhere out there, men were digging into land he had fought to hold. And now they knew he was watching. The sound of metal striking stone carried through the cold air like a warning bell. It was faint, but once he heard it, he could not pretend it was the wind. The cowboy stood still, listening, counting the rhythm. It came from beyond the north ridge, from the land he had trusted like a friend. He lowered the lantern and let the darkness settle around them. They are not even hiding it tonight, he said. They believe fear is enough, she replied. He checked the broken fence post. It had not snapped from weather. It had been struck clean and hard. Someone had come close enough to test him, not to steal, not yet, just to show they could. He repaired the post with a spare plank and extra rope while she calmed the horses. The stallion's breathing slowed under her steady hand. The mare leaned into her shoulder. He watched the way she moved among them, soft but sure, like someone raised with open sky and long trails. When they stepped back inside the cabin, neither of them spoke for a while. The small room felt tighter than before. The ranch no longer seemed like a place apart from the world. It felt watched. "You should sleep," he said at last. "And you will not?" she answered. He gave a half-smile. "Probably not." She settled near the door again, wrapped in a spare blanket he had offered. He sat at the table, revolver within reach, listening to every shift of the wind. His mind drifted over the years he had spent building this place. He had chosen this valley because it was quiet, because it felt untouched. He had wanted distance from towns full of whispers and men who smiled too easily. Now the quiet had been broken. Before dawn he made up his mind. When the first pale light crept across the ridge, he saddled the black stallion. The animal moved with restless energy, as if he understood that this morning would not be like the others. "I'm riding north," he told her. She stood and brushed dust from her skirt. "I will come. You don't have to. I know the trails better than they do." He hesitated only a second before nodding. He saddled the mare for her and handed her the reins. She mounted smoothly, no wasted motion. He noticed that she rode without fear, even after everything she had faced. They headed toward the north ridge, keeping to low ground and narrow paths that wound between rock and brush. The land there rose in uneven steps, dotted with scrub and patches of stubborn grass. From a distance it looked empty. Up close it told another story. They found the first sign near a cluster of boulders. A patch of earth had been disturbed, covered clumsily with loose brush. He dismounted and pushed aside the cover. Beneath it lay a shallow pit, fresh soil piled to one side. Marks of pickaxes cut into the rock. He ran his hand along the stone. "Silver vein," he murmured. She watched the horizon while he studied the pit. "There are more," she said. They rode farther up the ridge and found another site, then another. Some were small test digs. Others had grown deeper, supported by rough timber beams. Someone had invested time and money here. This was not the work of passing prospectors. It was organized. "They are building toward something larger," he said. "They already have," she replied. She led him to a narrow pass hidden between two tall rock faces. From there, they could see down into a shallow basin. Smoke rose thin and gray from a small camp below. 3 tents stood near a wagon loaded with crates. Men moved around a makeshift forge, their voices faint but clear enough to know they were at work. His jaw tightened. "On my land? On land they believe will soon belong to them," she said. "How? They plan to claim it once the silver is proven. They will say they discovered it first." He felt anger rise, not wild but focused. "They cannot claim what is already settled." "They can try," she said. "With money and the right friends?" He thought of the rancher from the auction, the sheriff who owed debts. He began to see the shape of it. If the ranch failed, or if he were forced to sell, the land could change hands quietly. A mining claim would follow. The valley would never be the same. A shout echoed from below. One of the men had climbed partway up the slope, scanning the ridge. The cowboy ducked back behind the rock face. "They have lookouts," he said. "They fear being seen," she answered. He studied her profile in the early light. "Why tell me all this?" "You could have walked away last night." She looked at him steadily. "Because your land borders my people's winter ground. If they dig deep enough, the water will turn bitter. We both lose." He nodded slowly. For the first time, he saw the full line that connected his fences to her camp. This was not just about silver. It was about water, grass, survival. They slipped back down the ridge without being noticed. As they rode toward the ranch, he felt the weight of a choice pressing harder on his shoulders. At midday, a rider appeared on the trail leading to his cabin, the rancher from the auction. The man approached alone, hands visible, a smile stretched thin across his face. The cowboy stepped out to meet him, keeping the door of the cabin at his back. "Fine morning," the rancher called. "For some," the cowboy replied. The rancher glanced toward the corral, then toward the hills. "Heard you got yourself good horses. They'll do. And the girl?" The cowboy's expression did not change. "She's under my roof. That's all you need to know." The rancher's smile faded slightly. You don't understand what you bought into. I understand enough. The rancher shifted in his saddle. There's opportunity in those hills. For men willing to work together. I am working, the cowboy said. On a dying ranch, the rancher countered. You're stretched thin, everyone knows it. But with the right partners, that land could make you rich. The offer hung between them like bait. And what would that partnership cost? The cowboy asked. Just your signature when the time comes, the rancher said smoothly. And maybe a little silence about what you think you've seen. The cowboy did not answer right away. He thought of the broken fence post, the hidden pits, the way the silver glinted in raw stone. I don't sell what isn't mine to sell, he said finally. The rancher's eyes hardened. Careful. Pride can be expensive. So can greed. For a moment neither man moved. The wind pushed dust between them. The rancher tipped his hat, but there was no warmth in the gesture. Think it over, he said. Winter's coming. Hard choices ahead. He turned his horse and rode off. From the cabin doorway she had watched the entire exchange. He offered you a share? She said quietly. He offered me a leash, he replied. She stepped closer. They will not stop with words. I know. That evening he rode to town alone. He needed to hear what was being said when he was not present. Red Mesa looked the same as always, but the air felt different. Conversations paused when he entered the general store. A few men nodded stiffly. At the saloon he found the sheriff nursing a drink. Heard there's talk of silver, the cowboy said, leaning against the bar. Always talk, the sheriff replied. Nothing proven. Looks proven to me. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward him, then away. You're a rancher. Best stick to cattle. And if cattle start drinking poisoned water? The sheriff's jaw tightened. Careful what accusations you throw around. He realized then that the lines had already been drawn. The sheriff would not stand against the men funding the digging. Not openly. When he left town, he felt the weight of isolation heavier than before. He was not just protecting a ranch. He was standing in the path of something bigger, something that mixed money, land claims, and old prejudice. Back at the cabin, she was tending to the horses again. The stallion seemed calmer, but his ears twitched at every distant sound. They know you went to town, she said. Let them. You are alone in this valley, she added. He looked toward the ridge, now dark against the fading sky. Not entirely. She met his gaze. For a brief moment there was understanding between them, quiet but strong. From the hills came the faint glow of lantern light, flickering where no ranch house stood. They are digging deeper tonight, she said. He felt a strange mix of anger and resolve. The silver in those hills could change everything. It could make him wealthy beyond the small dreams he once had. It could destroy the valley and drive her people away. It could turn neighbor against neighbor. He rested his hand on the corral fence, feeling the rough wood under his palm. They think I will bend, he said softly. Will you? She asked. He watched the ridge as another spark of light flashed and vanished. I don't know yet, he admitted. Somewhere out in the dark, men were carving into the earth, certain that money would shield them from consequence. Somewhere in town, deals were being whispered over glasses of cheap whiskey. And here at the edge of it all stood a small ranch, 2 strong horses, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The wind rose again, carrying the distant ring of metal against stone. And this time it sounded closer. The sound from the hills did not fade with the night. If anything, it grew steadier, like a heartbeat that refused to slow. The cowboy stood outside the cabin long after the stars had settled over the valley, listening to the faint ring of pick against stone. Every strike felt like it landed on his own chest. She joined him by the fence, wrapping her shawl tighter against the chill. The black stallion shifted behind them, restless but alert. They are rushing now, she said. They think I won't act, he replied. Or they want to force you to. He glanced at her. The firelight from the cabin window caught the edge of her face, showing the strength there, the quiet resolve that had not wavered since the auction yard. They expect me to sell, he said, or to get scared and leave. And will you? He looked toward the ridge where faint lantern light flickered like distant stars on the ground. Not yet. By morning, word had spread through Red Mesa that something was brewing in the valley. A ranch hand from the south pasture rode up to the cabin before noon, hat clutched tight in his hands. Men were riding fence lines before sunrise, the hand said. Not yours? Everyone's asking questions. What kind of questions? The cowboy asked. About land titles, water rights. Who's willing to make a deal if silver's proven? The cowboy felt the tension tighten like a drawn rope. And what did you tell them? That I work for you. After the hand rode off, he turned to her. They're trying to divide the valley. They will promise wealth, she said. Some will listen. He knew she was right. Hard seasons made people desperate. A few ounces of silver could look like salvation to a struggling rancher. That afternoon he rode north again, but not alone this time. She rode beside him, and behind them trailed two neighboring ranchers who had begun to suspect the same truth. They did not fully trust her, but they trusted the land they worked. When they reached the hidden pass, the smoke from the basin below was thicker than before. The mining camp had grown. More crates, more timber, a larger forge. Men moved quickly, hauling or toward the wagon. They're preparing to move it, one of the ranchers whispered. Before anyone can stop them, the other added. The cowboy studied the layout. If they haul that silver into town and register a claim, they'll say they discovered it clean, and the sheriff will nod, one rancher muttered. She pointed toward a narrow path leading from the basin to a higher ridge. There's another camp beyond that. Supplies, guards. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. They're ready for resistance. As if on cue, a rifle cracked somewhere across the basin. The shot struck rock near where they stood, sending chips of stone into the air. Back, he shouted. They pulled their horses behind cover. No one fired again, but the message was clear. They had been seen. They want to scare us off, one rancher said, voice tight. Or push us into doing something rash, the cowboy replied. They retreated down the ridge, keeping low until the basin was out of sight. When they reached open ground, the ranchers exchanged uneasy looks. This is bigger than we thought, one said. If they're armed and organized, we can't just ride in and demand they leave. No, the cowboy agreed. But we can't pretend it's not happening. Back at the cabin, the valley felt different. Riders moved more often along distant trails. Wagons rolled toward town at odd hours. The air carried the sense of a storm about to break. That evening, as the sun sank red behind the hills, a small group approached from the south. Not armed men, families, 2 wagons bearing her people's belongings. She stiffened beside him. They've been forced to move. The lead elder stepped down from the wagon, his face lined deep from years under the sun. He greeted her in low tones. She answered, then turned to the cowboy. They were told to leave the river by week's end, she said. Or soldiers would come. The cowboy felt anger flare again, sharper than before. On what grounds? On the grounds that a mining claim is being prepared. The elder studied the cowboy with steady eyes. You bought our daughter from shame, he said slowly. Now the land tests you. The words landed heavy. He looked at the wagons, at the children peering out from under canvas covers. This was no longer about one ranch or one claim. It was about who would shape the valley's future. You can camp near the creek, he said after a long pause. For now, the elder nodded once. By nightfall, lanterns glowed not only from the mining basin, but also from the small camp near his ranch. The valley, once quiet and wide, felt crowded with tension. Later, she stood by the water's edge, watching the reflection of moonlight ripple across the creek. They are pushing both sides, she said. If we fight each other, they win, he joined her. Some of my neighbors already think your people brought this trouble, and some of mine think you will. Betray us for silver. He did not deny that the thought of wealth had crossed his mind. It would be a lie to say otherwise. Silver could repenses, clear debts, build a bigger house. But he had seen what unchecked greed did to towns along the frontier. He had seen boom camps rise fast and fall faster, leaving nothing but dust and broken lives. They came to you first at the auction, he said. Why? Because I saw the digging, she answered. I followed them too close. They thought selling me with the horses would keep me quiet, and instead it tied us together. Yes. A distant rumble rolled across the valley. Not thunder. Wagon wheels over rock, more supplies heading north. The next morning, the rancher from the auction returned, But this time he did not ride alone. Two men flanked him, both armed. The cowboy stepped out from the cabin before they reached the fence. "We're done with polite offers," the rancher called. "You're stirring trouble?" "You dug on my land," the cowboy replied evenly. "Your land sits on something bigger than cattle," the rancher said. "Don't be foolish. Sign an agreement, take your share, and no one gets hurt." "And if I refuse?" The rancher's smile thinned. "Then the valley will decide without you." Behind the cabin, members of her camp had gathered quietly. Children were pulled inside wagons. The tension hung thick as smoke. "You can't push everyone out," the cowboy said. "Not without a fight. We won't need one," the rancher answered. "Once the claim is filed, the law will handle the rest." He tipped his hat and rode away again, leaving dust swirling in his wake. She stepped up beside the cowboy. "They move to file the claim soon. How long?" he asked. "Days, maybe less." He looked toward town, imagining the papers being signed, the sheriff's seal pressed down. Once it happened, everything would change. "We need proof," he said. "Of what?" "That they started digging before any legal claim, that they threatened you, that they damaged my property." She held his gaze. "And who will listen?" He thought of the neighboring ranchers who had ridden with him, of the ranch hand who had warned him, of others who feared losing their water rights once mining began. "They might," he said. Over the next 2 days he rode across the valley, speaking with every rancher willing to open a gate. Some refused to get involved, others listened in silence. A few agreed that the digging had gone too far. "They're bringing in outside investors," one older rancher said. "Once that happens, we'll be overrun. And water will be the first thing to suffer," another added. Slowly, a small group formed. Not a mob, not a militia. Just landowners who wanted answers. Meanwhile, she gathered her own people by the creek. She spoke to them in calm tones, urging patience but also readiness. The elder watched the cowboy from a distance, weighing his actions. On the third night, the mining camp lights burned brighter than ever. A larger wagon arrived, pulled by 4 horses. Crates were loaded in haste. "They're moving the first haul," she said, standing beside him on the ridge. "If that silver reaches town before we act, it's over," he replied. Below them, men shouted orders. The wagon creaked forward, heavy with ore. Behind the cowboy, 2 ranchers waited with tense faces. Down by the creek, her people watched in silence. He felt the valley holding its breath. The black stallion stamped the ground, eager and powerful under his hand. The mare tossed her head, sensing the coming storm. "If we stop that wagon," one rancher whispered, "there's no turning back." He knew that. Once they moved openly against the mining operation, there would be no more quiet warnings, no more polite offers. She looked at him, eyes steady. "This is the moment." Lantern light flickered across the basin as the wagon began its climb toward the main trail. The men guarding it rode close, rifles slung at their shoulders. The cowboy drew a slow breath, feeling every year he had spent building his ranch pressing against this single choice. The valley lay divided behind him. Silver glittered ahead. Between them stood the future of water, land, and trust. He tightened his grip on the reins and stepped forward from the cover of rock, the others moving with him. Down below, one of the miners spotted the movement and shouted. The wagon halted. All eyes turned toward the ridge as figures emerged against the night sky. And in that charged silence, with the fate of the valley hanging between greed and grit, the first word was about to be spoken. The night air went still as stone. The wagon loaded with silver or creaked to a stop halfway up the ridge. Lantern light flickered against the rock walls, throwing long shadows across the mining camp. The men guarding it stared up at the figures standing against the skyline. The cowboy felt the weight of every eye on him, but he did not reach for his revolver. He stepped forward first, boots firm on the gravel. The black stallion stood behind him, tall and steady. On either side, the neighboring ranchers held their ground. A little farther back, her people watched from the darkness near the creek, quiet but present. "This land is under dispute," the cowboy called out, his voice carrying across the basin. "No silver leaves tonight." One of the miners laughed sharply. "You planning to stop us alone?" "I'm not alone," he replied. From the ridgeline behind him, more shapes stepped into view. Ranchers who had been unsure 2 days ago now stood shoulder to shoulder. They did not wave rifles. They did not shout threats, they simply showed up. The rancher from the auction pushed his horse forward from below, face hard in the lantern glow. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "That wagon is bound for town. We have investors waiting. You started digging before filing any claim," the cowboy said evenly. "You crossed fence lines and split posts. You forced families off winter ground. That's not how lawful mining works." Murmurs moved through the men in the basin. Some looked uncertain. They had come for wages, not for trouble. The rancher's jaw tightened. "You have no proof." Before the cowboy could answer, she stepped forward beside him. "I do," she said. Her voice did not waver. It carried the same quiet strength she had shown in the auction yard. She lifted a small leather pouch and poured its contents onto a flat rock. Inside were pieces of marked timber, cut from the first beams used to shore up the pit. Each was stamped with a supplier's brand from weeks earlier. "They purchased these before any legal notice," she continued. "They began digging in secret." "I saw it, others saw it." One of the older ranchers behind the cowboy spoke up. "I saw fresh pits before any claim was posted at the general store. And I saw their men riding fence lines at dawn," another added. "Threatening water rights." The tension shifted. The miners looked at one another. The rancher from the auction realized the balance had changed. This was no longer one stubborn rancher and a native woman. It was a valley speaking with one voice. "You think the sheriff will side with you?" he shot back. At that moment, hoofbeats echoed from the trail behind the basin. All heads turned. The sheriff rode into view, lantern swinging from his saddle horn. Behind him came 2 deputies and several townsfolk who had followed the rumor of confrontation. The sheriff's eyes moved from the loaded wagon to the gathered ranchers and then to the families camped near the creek. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The cowboy stepped down the slope, careful and slow. "An illegal mining operation," he said. "Digging before filing a claim, harassing landowners, forcing families off ground they've used for years." The rancher opened his mouth to argue, but the sheriff raised a hand. "Is it true you began extraction before registering?" the sheriff asked sharply. Silence stretched in the basin. One of the miners shifted uneasily. "We were told paperwork was being handled." "By whom?" the sheriff pressed. No one answered. The sheriff turned to the rancher from the auction. "I warned you about cutting corners." The rancher's confidence faltered. He had counted on quiet compliance, not open resistance. He had counted on fear dividing the valley. The sheriff dismounted and walked to the wagon. He lifted a chunk of silver ore from one of the crates, weighing it in his palm. "You file first," he said slowly. "Then you dig." "That's the law. And what about the land dispute?" the cowboy asked. The sheriff looked around at the assembled ranchers and families. "If enough of you testify that digging started early, I can freeze any claim until it's reviewed by the territorial office." The rancher bristled. "You'd stall a fortune over a technicality?" "Over order," the sheriff replied. The word hung heavy. For a long moment no one moved. The night that had promised violence instead held something else. Choice. The sheriff handed the ore back to the miner. "Unload the wagon," he ordered. "No silver leaves this valley tonight." Reluctantly, the men began pulling crates down. The rancher from the auction glared up at the cowboy, fury simmering in his eyes, but he did not draw his weapon. He knew the tide had turned. As the lanterns dimmed and the wagon emptied, the basin seemed smaller, less powerful. Without secrecy and speed on their side, the miners looked like ordinary men caught in a bad gamble. The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with paperwork promised and witnesses gathered. By dawn, the mining camp was quiet. The sheriff posted a temporary notice halting operations until an official review could be made. The investors, hearing of the dispute and unified resistance, began to pull back. Silver was valuable, but not worth a public scandal or legal battle that could drag for months. In the days that followed, something changed in the valley. Ranchers who had once kept to themselves began meeting openly near the creek. Water rights were discussed fairly. Fence lines were walked together. The idea of shared protection took root. If mining were ever to happen, it would be done with agreement, not secrecy. The elder from her camp stood beside the cowboy one morning as sunlight spread across the ridge. "You chose the harder road?" the elder said. "It didn't feel like much of a choice," the cowboy replied. It was. The winter ground by the river was secured for her people, at least for the season. The sheriff, under watchful eyes, kept his word about reviewing claims properly. The rancher from the auction sold off his stake and left Red Mesa before the first snow fell. The silver remained in the hills, untapped for now. It no longer felt like a promise of fortune. It felt like a reminder of how easily greed could fracture a community. One evening, weeks later, the cowboy stood by the corral watching the black stallion and the brown Murray graze in the fading light. The fences were repaired stronger than before. His debt, though still present, felt less suffocating. Neighbors had offered help with timber in exchange for shared labor at harvest. She approached quietly, carrying a bucket of water. You could still sell, she said, a hint of a smile touching her face. The silver is not gone, he shook his head. I'd rather grow something that doesn't poison the creek. She studied him, then looked toward the north ridge. My people will move camp with the seasons, that is our way. But we will not forget what happened here. And I won't forget who stood with me on that ridge, he replied. For a moment they stood in easy silence. The valley felt wide again, not empty but full of shared breath. You bought 2 horses that day, she said softly. He glanced at the stallion, strong and sleek under the sun. Best decision I ever made. And the rest? He met her eyes. The rest wasn't part of the deal. It was something better. She did not look away this time. The distance that had once stood between them in the auction yard had closed slowly, built on trust instead of fear. As winter settled over Red Mesa, snow dusted the ridge where the mining camp once stood. The pits were covered and marked, not hidden but watched. If silver were ever to be claimed, it would be through agreement and fairness. The ranch survived the season. The horses proved their worth hauling timber and strengthening fences. Neighbors worked together more often than before. Suspicion gave way to respect. And the story of the auction day spread beyond the valley. People spoke of how a native woman had been thrown in free with 2 horses, treated like an afterthought. They spoke of a cowboy who only meant to buy livestock but ended up defending his land and his neighbors. They spoke of how greed nearly tore the valley apart and how unity stitched it back together. The lesson lingered longer than the silver ever would. Land is more than ground under boots. It is water shared, fences mended, and voices joined when it matters. Freedom cannot be traded like property. And sometimes the greatest fortune is not found in a mine, but in standing firm when it would be easier to bend. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in warm gold, the cowboy and the young woman rode side by side across the ridge. The black stallion moved with calm strength. The mare followed steady and sure. Below them, the valley stretched peaceful and wide. He had thought he was saving his ranch when he raised his hand at that auction. He had not known he was saving something much larger. And in the quiet wind over Red Mesa, it finally felt like everything he had built was safe.